Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théères, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est long, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
Martin Luther King Jr. would have turned 92 years old this week, 7 years younger than Betty White, to get a sense of how close this history is. We celebrate a holiday commemorating MLK just 12 days after a white supremacist riot stormed the United States Capitol carrying the flag of Donald Trump. And if it is still unclear to you at this late date what position Trump and his administration have on the forces of white supremacy that course through our history, look no further than their official White House document released today on MLK Day titled The 1776 Report. It was commissioned last fall as an obvious attempt to rebut the 1619 Project, the New York Times Magazine, which was an examination of the history and enduring consequences of the institution of American slavery. Today's report from the White House reads like, oh man, I don't know, like a sophomore year term paper maybe by Stephen Miller, using images of Martin Luther King Jr., Frederick Douglass, and Abraham Lincoln while defending America's founding on slavery, all stamped with the weight of the U.S. government. Christina Greer is an associate professor of political science at Fordham University, and she joins me now. I mean, the first thing I will say here is this is not in any way like a serious anything. It's essentially a troll. That's the full content of it. Like, there is no actual intellectual, like, there's interesting stuff to debate about the 1619 Project and the role of slavery. Like, there's real academic debate on this. This is not that.
Absolutely not, Chris. And I think you're being very generous by saying it's a sophomore year paper.
High school. I should have been clear.
Okay.
Sophomore high school.
Okay.
Yes.
I'll give you that. I mean, just it's music. You know, it's musings and pictures of MLK, Dr. King, and Frederick Douglass. But, you know, the fact that the architects of this project and had the audacity to put it out on a day like today, after what we witnessed on January 6th, when we know there are certain things that are facts, Chris. The vast majority of the founding fathers of this nation, I call them the framers, they owned human beings. They owned enslaved Africans. They forcibly raped women. They separated families. They defecated in people's mouths. These are all documented. They beat people to death. They treated them worse than animals. And so for this project to say, well, I mean, other people did it too, and to keep talking about it is really divisive. I don't understand how we can ever move forward as a nation if we don't recognize the reality and brutality and the bloodthirsty nature of the white supremacy that this nation is predicated on, and the anti-black racism that this nation is predicated on.
That point about the cruelty and the monstrosity of the institution of American slavery and its distinctness. I mean, the report makes this argument like, well, slaves have been common throughout human history. American chattel slavery was just a different institution than those institutions. It was like what happened in the Caribbean as well. But, you know, one of the things that blew my mind, because the history isn't taught, is when you go back to the contemporary observers at the time, Tocqueville's one of them, tons of English at the time who were like, boy, these Americans, they talk a big game about freedom, but man, do they whip the hell out of their human slaves that they own. Like, they realized at the time. You cannot stress this enough. And honestly, the thing that the 1619 Project helped to do was reset people's understanding, because I think that the history a lot of us earned was like, they didn't know any better. And this is trying to sort of reassert that idea.
Right. And keep in mind, Alexis de Tocqueville's coming to just study some prisons, and he's just observing American life. And he recognizes that this is a certain type of brutality that he was just unused to. But I think we also have to recognize that it's a four-legged table of not just white supremacy and anti-black racism, but racialized capitalism. And patriarchy is the fourth leg. But the racialized capitalism piece is what threw off so many European observers, where they recognized that the economic vitality of this new nation was predicated on enslaving human beings, right, and selling them throughout the nation. And so, as we try and present this, America as a brochure is phenomenal. It's a 5-star Ritz-Carlton, right? It's a Four Seasons. America in practice. The fact that we stay at war, the fact that we cannot get enough of subjugating other groups of people, primarily Black Americans. Every single policy in this country is based on exclusion of Black Americans to a certain degree. This is who we are. And so we still have, in the year of our Lord 2021, where Americans scratching their heads and saying, like, this isn't us. How can it be? It absolutely is. And this is what James Baldwin says. What you have to do to tell yourself that this isn't you does more damage to you than anyone else. And this is what's been going on in America. And we've reached this point where we now have people storming the Capitol with the Confederate flag with swastikas, essentially claiming it's their nation, because we've never had honest conversations. We talk about George Washington and his wooden teeth, and we don't talk about the fact that George Washington ripped the teeth out of his enslaved Africans and put them in his own mouth as his dentures. So, like, we've never been honest about who we are as a nation, and we find ourselves here trying to face it in 2021.
The final point to me that's also just absurd here is, like, look, we debate all this stuff. We fight about it. That's what good, open, democratic culture is. People have arguments about history. That's what academic debates exist in. There's a million on everything. This idea that there's some, like, great patriotic education that everyone needs to take in uniform is so offensive to the very democratic underpinnings of the entire enterprise of a free people.
Right. Well, I mean, if you want to have a universal education, we just need to base it in fact. So, you know, I'm not against having a universal understanding of what America is, but that understanding has to be based in the fact that we are a nation that practiced U.S. chattel slavery for centuries, and it has repercussions in every single aspect of policy that we see today.
It is Tuesday, the 19th of January of 2021. And you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef. And our daily special is Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays, a small scant dash. A mere pinch of hot smoked Hungarian paprika will make all the difference in the world. It always has, and it always will. Speaking of always has and always will, you know, here in America, we have this thing called the transition of power, the peaceful transition of power. And it's a bit, disappointing that we have to have so many military troops in the Capitol right now to assure a peaceful transition. And it wasn't Antifa. It wasn't the hippies. It wasn't the liberals. It wasn't the Democratic people out there in the world causing this. Who? Yes, the usual suspects. The ones who don't believe in free and fair elections. The ones who suppress the vote. The ones who suppress civil and voting rights. The ones who do not even want to be a good neighbor. How dare they? How dare they force them to be good neighbors? Yes, America is quite exceptional in that way. You know, every time I see that guy with the bull horns, the bison horns, or whatever it is, not when I say bullhorn, I don't mean like the amplified tool in which to broadcast your voice over a distance. I mean the headdress. I will not call him a shaman, because he's not. All right? He's in some sort of, he can't even be in a Ren Fair. At least the Klingons can be in the Ren Fair. Which brings to mind, there were no Ren Fair Klingons, I noticed, in the insurrection when they invaded the Capitol. So far, I haven't seen any tapes or anybody say, oh, yeah, there were some Ren Fair Klingons. They're everywhere, because they're Klingons. Well, even they wouldn't join the insurrection. But every time I see that guy, I think about how exceptional America really is to allow something like that. All right. I know there might have been a day when I would have run around in, I don't know, moccasins and some sort of weird horned headdress like that and bellowed. But usually it would have been like out in the middle of the forest where no one could see me. Yeah, I wouldn't want to instill that memory on anyone for the rest of their lives. And also, all kidding aside, what does that guy represent? And he's been given a platform. You know, sometimes people just hold up signs, John 3:16. This guy, his tats are white supremacist tats. And an appropriation of Norse culture to advance some sort of weird white nationalism BS. Oh, yeah, that guy's like a shaman. No, he's not. Jeez. You know, there is a shaman school. Anybody who read the Lessons of Don Juan would know. And it's quite rigorous, and I don't think this guy would pass. Oh, boy. So we have that going on for us. And then tomorrow, yes, the inauguration. Oh, it's a new era. Please let it be a new era. I still have feelings of foreboding. Apparently, 27,000 National Guardsmen are and have been vetted. A lot of people say, well, how could the FBI vet all of them so quickly? Well, you know, it's not just the FBI. They are in the military, after all. I think there are some commanders in the midst of that who are not racist, who are following orders to uphold and protect the Constitution against enemies foreign and domestic. So those people who storm the Capitol are domestic enemies of the state. Which is kind of redundant, but you get what I mean. And at least we have military commanders who believe that is so. And yeah, they're going to be vetting their guys too. They're going to go through their paperwork. And I think, you know, that it's possible to look at all these people's social media posts. You can't scrub them all, guys. Just letting you know. And like I say, look at their tats first. Go from there. You could also check out, how festooned their monster trucks are with Trump paraphernalia. That's another clue. Trump flags out in front of their property still after the insurrection. I'd probably be questioning them and their intentions. Do you intend to overthrow the United States government? Back in the day, that would get you thrown in jail. You fly a Trump flag, you put Trump signs out in front of your property after the insurrection. I think you should have an interview with the FBI. That's just me, because I'm a romantic. So, yeah, I think that these 27,000 plus National Guards troops can be vetted in time. And, yeah. So I also know that people like us are emboldened now. If you see something, say something. I used to think, that is just such Stasi bullshit. But right now, I'd rather err on the side of caution. We don't want to overload people with, false positives now. We don't want to do that. We don't want to get the FBI on somebody just because we don't like somebody. But yeah, I think that if there's any of us who suspect that people would take part in this kind of activity, who have taken part in this kind of activity, they should be visited by the FBI. And how does the FBI visit them? Well, they have to be told. They're not going to figure it out all by themselves. That's what tips are for. And in this vetting of the National Guard, there's enough bureaucratic staff there that can do that. Of course, who's vetting the bureaucratic staff? You see how it works? Don't forget, George W. Bush couldn't, really man up his military in the proper way for his perceived wars. You remember in 9/11? I know all of us do because we're of a certain age. It was, some people really from Saudi Arabia, probably at the behest of Saudi Arabia, George didn't do something. Maybe didn't kiss the cheeks well enough when they visited. Who knows? But and so to get back at Saudi Arabia, well, we went and got into a war with Afghanistan and then Iraq. So to do that, the military needed more bodies, cannon fodder. They needed more cannon fodder, and so they lowered the standards to get into the military. And what happened? Well, when we didn't have our own troops, shooting up like a bunch of cowboys in the middle of some square somewhere in the Middle East, we had private contractors doing it. So, now what do we have? Well, former and current private contractors who are at heart probably white nationalists, and they can make money at it. Plus the true believer in white nationalists. I just loved listening to that real estate lady, Jenna Ryan. And she was on some local TV station. And she's going, I was just doing what the president said. Oh, really? Are you that gullible? There's no excuse, Somebody says, go in there and rob that bank for me and kill Sharon Tate while you're at it. You can't just say, well, Charlie told me. I was just doing what Charlie said. Don't blame me. He said everything would be good when we did it, and I was just doing what Charlie said. It's not going to work, lady. It didn't work before. It's not going to work now. Let's hope. Of course, back then we didn't have a lot of Federalist Society judges because we didn't have a Federalist Society. That was to come later. And why did we get a Federalist Society? It was get back for kicking Nixon out. And why did we kick Nixon out? Because he was a crook. And apparently the force of our Constitution has to be used to make sure that crooks stay in power. That's what the Federalist Society is for. Now, I'm not so sure that they liked one Donald Trump, but he sure did get a lot of their people packed into the courts. Packed. Embedded. Burrowed. Yeah, what's the story about this guy getting burrowed into the top of the NSA? Right in the last days. What's up with that? Shouldn't there be a moratorium on what a twice impeached president can install in the last days of his, corrupt rule? You would think, wouldn't you? You would think the Justice Department would have a little-known OLC memo about that. Maybe they do. That says, oh, yeah, let him salt the earth on the way out. We don't care. Well, that's not protecting the Constitution of the United States from enemies, foreign and domestic. Okay? Of course, one could argue, how do you fight an enemy that's foreign and domestic, and he's sitting in the Oval Office? Jeez. There used to be a great tradition that, the outgoing president would, list, the outgoing leader, let's put it that way. The outgoing leader would list their accomplishments and what they had done in the last 4 years. And I haven't seen any scheduling for Vladimir Putin to give that speech. It's so weird. Well, I don't know. Maybe afterwards, much afterwards. What's on the rest of the menu here in the Bistro Cafe, part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy at the top? Yes, am I upset about the 1776 report? As pointed out It does read like a high school sophomore year term paper by Stephen Miller to erase the legacy of slavery. Yeah, it sounded less like a 1776 report and more like someone writing for the South in 1861. That's what it really sounded like, and that's why everybody figures it was Stephen Miller. On the rest of the menu, Republicans really don't want New York to get the same COVID relief as anyone else, because they don't like New York. Republicans are also really mad that they're finally paying the consequences for inciting violence. They don't like it at all. And Parler partially reappeared with support from a Russian technology firm. I'm shocked. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where the Greek president praised Olympic sailing champion Sofia Bekatorou for reporting a historic allegation of sexual assault. And a young Somali lawmaker defends her seat. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. Off to the rightish of the page is our chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. And to the left of that chat room link, near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, is the link to our Patreon page. And if you could please become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, that recurring Patreonage, say, how about the cost of an espresso-type coffee drink? Those funds sent our way once a month. We stretch those dollars beyond compare, pay our bills, fly under the radar, continue resisting this neo-Nazi white nationalist takeover of the United States. We're going to resist it and fulfill our civic duty. And thank you for your generosity in allowing us to do so. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, you can do it very simply by going to @Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that. Thank you, Tom. I, of course, take care of me, and I am at Justice Putnam on Twitter. And I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Kos about 10 minutes before showtime. Post that up on Twitter and other social media platforms. You know who they are. And that's what you do. So get those show notes and links, because it is a very integral part of this whole multimedia operation. You can follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West and pick up podcasts. Please do pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, Apple Podcasts, and wherever fine podcasts can be found. And we are mixed in with all of those. Everything's mixed in together. Even the fine ones are mixed in. Okay. Well, let us now go to this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. It comes out of the American Independent, and it is by Donna Provencher. Republican lawmakers slammed Governor Andrew Cuomo of New York this week over the fact that New York will be getting $2 billion in federal aid to fight COVID. But the funding is the result of a federal change that will be equally applied to help all the other states too, even South Dakota. You know, the one that has the highest ratio of COVID infections in the world. There's no doubt New York has been in dire straits lately. It has suffered 1.25 million cases and about 40,000 deaths since the pandemic began. With its COVID numbers soaring once again, the state received 50,000 fewer vaccines last week than promised by the federal government. But Republicans see no reason that the federal government should help Cuomo backfill budget caps with a bailout. That's what they call it, a bailout. There is absolutely no reason President-elect Joe Biden should hand out $2 billion in FEMA emergency funds to his friend New York Cuomo, tweeted Senator Rick Scott, Repug of Florida, tweeting a link to his own Fox News interview in the process. This bailout is to backfill budget gaps caused by his own mismanagement, has nothing to do with COVID. Taxpayers shouldn't be on the hook for New York's failure. Well, you know what? What about inaction? What about ignorance? What about conscious denial that the pandemic was happening? And states like South Dakota have the highest ratio of infections in the world, Rick. Mr. I frauded the Medicare program more than anybody in the history of the world, and I got fined more than anybody in the history of the world. Rick Scott? That Rick Scott? Yes. On Saturday, Representative Tom Reed, a repug of New York, also slammed Cuomo for supposed incompetence. Governor Cuomo has his deception and incompetence on full display, and enough is enough, Reed wrote in a Facebook post. Thousands of nursing home residents died due to his policy. Countless vaccine doses have been poured down the drain due to his policy, and New Yorkers cannot navigate the convoluted vaccine sign-up sites. And that's if they're lucky that the site hasn't crashed. Where did Reed get this voice? I don't know. He was writing it down in a Facebook post. Reed added that when he's questioned about any of it, it's someone else's fault. Really? Aren't you projecting a little bit there, Mr. GOP guy? But the $2 billion in additional funding New York will be receiving is not some kind of special treatment or handout to Cuomo from the president-elect, as GOP lawmakers claim. Biden plans to take immediate administrative action when he takes office to change the Federal Emergency Management Agency's current reimbursement rate for states' emergency COVID-19 costs. The current reimbursement rate is 75%, and that's going to be increased to 100%, which will result in an extra $2 billion in emergency funding for New York and a proportional amount for other states, including South Dakota. It is true that New York Democrat Senator Chuck Schumer claims to have urged Biden to increase the reimbursement rate, but the new change will apply to all state and local governments because we're not transactional mobsters like Trump and his crew. Okay? There's a new era now, sort of like the old era. Of the plan, Cuomo said nearly a year ago, Trump promised FEMA would reimburse 100% of New York's expenses, but like many of his promises, Donald Trump reneged and New Yorkers suffered. Well, Scott and Reed certainly aren't the first Republicans to act like COVID deaths in blue states shouldn't be their problem. On September 16th, Trump famously remarked that the U.S. would have very low death rates if you take the blue states out. So we're down in this territory, he said. And that's despite the fact that the blue states have tremendous death rates. And if you take the blue states out, we're at a level that I don't think anybody in the world would be at. We're really at a very low level. Well, you know what? You were voted out because you're a heartless, soulless monster, and America is not. Donna Provencher also, and she's from the American Independent, also brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. High-profile Republicans are slamming social media platforms in the wake of Twitter bans and suspensions for inciting violence on social media in the days leading up to President-elect Joe Biden's inauguration. Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, now a repug of Q, Georgia, condemned Twitter on Sunday after the platform temporarily suspended her account due to inflammatory statements potentially encouraging violence by Trump supporters after their deadly attack on the Capitol on January 6th. This was after. Greene is best known for backing Trump's false election fraud claims, as well as her promotion of the dangerous QAnon conspiracy theory, which posits that Trump is the GOP's defender against a secret cabal of cannibalistic child trafficking Democrats in U.S. leadership roles, with also Italian recipes. I'm still waiting for Podesta's puttanesca recipe. We're getting bored with the risotto. Will Q please free up Podesta's puttanesca recipe, please? A spokesperson for Twitter told Business Insider that Greene had acted against its civic integrity policy, noting that the GOP representative was locked out for multiple reasons. Greene had posted a clip on Sunday from an interview in which she again promoted debunked claims about widespread voter fraud, an apparent violation of Twitter's terms of service. And on Saturday, she also posted and then deleted content encouraging followers to mobilize in support of Trump. Her remarks came just days before Biden's inauguration, which is tomorrow. As threats of violence continue, Washington, D.C. is heightened security measures surrounding the event, and Twitter has cracked down on at least 70,000 other QAnon-related accounts. I was wondering why it was so reasonable lately on Twitter. Kenneth Lee and Elizabeth Coulaford of Reuters brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Parler, a social media website and app popular with the American far right, has partially returned online with the help of a Russian-owned technology company. Parler vanished from the internet when dropped by Amazon Inc.'s hosting arm, and other partners for poor moderation after its users called for violence and posted videos glorifying the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. On Monday, yesterday, Parler's website was reachable again, though only with a message from its chief executive saying he was working to restore functionality. The Internet Protocol address it used is owned by DDoS Guard, which is controlled by 2 Russian men, and provides services including protection from distributed denial of service attacks. Infrastructure expert Ronald Gilmet told Reuters, if the website is fully restored, Parler users would be able to see and post comments. Most users prefer the app, however, which remains banned from the official Apple Inc. and Google stores. DDoS Guard has worked with other racist, rightist, and conspiracy sites that have been used by mass murderers to share messages, including 8kun. It has also supported Russian government sites. DDoS Guard's website lists an address in Scotland under the company name Cognitive Cloud LP, but that is owned by two men in Rostov-on-Don, Russia, Gilmet said. One of them told The Guardian recently that he was not aware of all of the content the company facilitates. Oh, the old ignorance is my excuse. Parler critics said it was a potential security risk for it to depend on a Russian company, as well as an odd choice for a site popular with self-described patriots. Well, they'd rather be in Russia anyway. They only told us so. They don't want to be around black people. And I think they consider Russia to be white paradise. Russian propaganda has stoked political divisions in the U.S., supporting outgoing President Donald Trump, and I don't know why we're using the P word for him ever, and amplifying false narratives about election fraud, but also protests against police brutality. Parler, which disclosed it has over 12 million users, sued Amazon last Monday after the commerce giant and cloud services provider cut off services, citing poor moderation of calls to violence. In an update yesterday, Monday, Parler.com linked to a Fox News interview in which the CEO Mates said he was confident Parler would return at the end of January, just in time to mess up the Biden presidency. Good luck with that, fella. We're on to you now. And when you owe Vlad, you owe Vlad. All right, let's get to our break. And when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world. And we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. And we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Jason Goldman. The cheetah is the rarest big cat in Africa. Less than 7,000 adults remain on the planet. Think of it this way. For every cheetah on the planet, there's more than 4 Starbucks coffee shops. The most important cheetah stronghold is in central Namibia, but the cheetahs there don't live within national parks. They live on privately owned farmland.
There were farmers having huge problems with cheetahs, losing a lot of livestock, and there were other farmers who actually didn't have any problem at all.
Ecologist Jörg Melsheimer from the Leibniz Institute for Zoo and Wildlife Research in Berlin assumed at first that all farmers had cheetah trouble. It was just that some were more likely to complain about it. But after tracking 50 collared cheetahs, he began to suspect that there really was a pattern to their killing. By the time his team had data from 106 cheetahs collared over the course of a decade, not only was he certain that cheetahs were more likely to kill in some places than in others, but that he could solve the problem.
We indeed found these communication hubs of cheetahs, which are spread evenly across the landscape, with a high activity of cheetahs within the hubs.
Cheetahs are an asocial species, but they still need to trade information.
They don't meet physically, typically not, but they leave marks at prominent landmarks where they either use urine or feces to communicate with each other.
Think of it as a coffee shop for cats, where animals trade gossip. Even though these communication hubs only comprise around 10% of the landscape, cheetahs spend most, sometimes all, of their time within them.
This is basically a long-term tradition, which is passed on from cheetah generation to cheetah generation. Some of these communication hubs are basically known, or let's say the marking location, the marking trees were known by farmers for 60, 70 years. Like the grandfather of the current farmer already knew the marking trees in this area.
What the farmers never realized is that only some farms overlap with the cheetah's communication hubs. Melsheimer thought that if those farmers relocated their most vulnerable herds, it could be a huge help. He remembers the first farmer he tried to convince.
And I told him, look, Wilfried, I have the idea that they are actually there because of these marking trees, and you happen to have your small calves exactly in the same area. Let's try to move your herds out of this area and keep them somewhere else, and then let's measure the losses. And he was laughing at me. He said, yeah, nice idea, but I'm not sure whether this is going to work. They will probably follow the calves. So we tried this, and actually it worked. And he earned much more money because he lost less calves.
After that, 35 more farmers agreed to try it out. In all, the number of calves lost to cheetah predation fell by a whopping 86%. Of course, some cattle outside of communication hubs were still lost to cheetahs, but it was at a low enough level that most farmers seemed to tolerate it. What this means is that cheetahs aren't actively following the cattle. They simply take advantage of whatever food is available nearby. If it's not cattle, then they go after wild ungulates like springbok or oryx or kudu. There are no so-called problem cheetahs who intentionally seek out cattle. Instead, there are problem areas. That's a much easier problem to solve, and it's one that doesn't result in farmers killing cheetahs. Melsheimer is now hard at work collecting tracking data from cheetahs in other parts of Africa to see whether his findings hold up in other ecosystems. So often it seems as if the goals of wildlife conservation are incompatible with the goals of commerce. But this story reveals that, in fact, biodiversity and agriculture can coexist.
Our case is really one of these nice examples where it can go hand in hand.
Thanks for listening. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Jason Goldman.
Hi, it's Tom. Could we humbly suggest your donation to netrootsradio.com? All we've got to run this 24-hour powerhouse of progressive resistance radio is what comes out of our own wallets. And you are our biggest donor. And it doesn't take much, $3, $5. Just go to the bottom of our netrootsradio.com page and hit our secure donate button. Heck, you can even make a recurring contribution, and you'll get a wondiferous pair of Netroots radio stickers for application to your backpack, your bumper sticker, or your banjo. Well, it's up to you which backpack you want to put it on. So donate what you'd like at the bottom of our netrootsradio.com's homepage, because you are our biggest donor. netrootsradio.com. Together, we are Resistance Radio.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1909. That was the day Lewis Hine photographed child workers standing on spinning frames to mend threads and replace empty bobbins at the Bib Mill No. 1 in Macon, Georgia. It was just one example of the appalling use of children in industrial labor. Hine built his career on photographic portraits of young miners and mill workers, child cotton pickers, and factory workers. In 1908, he was hired by the National Child Labor Committee to document child laborers across the country. For the next 15 years, Hine would contribute over 5,000 photographs to the cause of ending child labor. Photo historian Dale Kaplan described the ways in which Hine captured these images, writing, "Hine, the gentleman actor and mimic, assumed a variety of personas, including Bible salesman, postcard salesman, and industrial photographer, making a record of factory machinery to gain entry into the workplace. When unable to deflect his confrontations with management, he simply waited outside the canneries, mines, factories, farms, and sweatshops with his 50 pounds of photographic equipment and photographed children as they entered and exited the workplace." NCLC investigators referenced the photographs in reports on particular industries and locations. The NCLC also used the photographs to illustrate its own publications and succeeded in placing them in newspapers, progressive publications, and exhibits. One NCLC poster that featured Hines' portrait read, "Making human junk. Shall industry be allowed to put these costs on society?" By 1912, the NCLC persuaded Congress to create a United States Children's Bureau. The two organizations worked together to investigate abuses of child laborers. Years of legislative and judicial battles followed, until finally, in 1938, Congress passed the Fair Labor Standards Act.
I read the news today, oh boy.
It's time for Nicole Sandler's What's News from NicoleSandler.com and the Progressive Voices Network.
If it's Tuesday, it's Donald Trump's last full day in office. Woo. His final Gallup job approval rating is 34%. The lowest of his term, and it makes him the only president in Gallup's history to have never crossed the 50% line. Tomorrow, Wednesday, he retreats to Florida. The Senate prepares an impeachment trial, and Joseph R. Biden will be inaugurated as the 46th president of the United States. On his first day in office, President Biden plans to propose sweeping immigration reform, including an 8-year path to citizenship for undocumented immigrants. He also plans to do away with several Trump policies on the environment. Biden reportedly will cancel the permit for the controversial Keystone XL pipeline as soon as he takes office, and has plans to reverse other policies Trump used to counter Obama environmental initiatives. Biden also plans to rejoin the 2015 Paris Climate Change Agreement, probably on his first day in office. And aides say he also plans to approve green energy projects and restore national monument protections that Trump cut. I think I can see Mother Earth smiling. For his final act, Donald Trump is expected to issue around 100 pardons and commutations during his last full day in office. The list of clemency actions reportedly includes white-collar criminals and high-profile rappers. The latest reports say that Trump will not pardon himself or members of his immediate family, though, as we know from the last 4 years, that could change. Congress is making preparations. In the Senate, Democratic leader Chuck Schumer and Republican leader Mitch McConnell are negotiating a plan for how the evenly split Senate will be run. Though Democrats technically hold a majority because the vice president, in this case Kamala Harris, would serve as the tiebreaker, Democrats will get to make the schedule, but each party will probably hold an even number of committee seats. Chuck Schumer, on Tuesday, is expected to designate a sweeping package of campaign reforms as the honorary first bill of Congress, S1, the For the People Act, written by Senator Jeff Merkley of Oregon, is introduced. It's expected to include provisions making it easier to vote nationwide, including automatic voter registration or same-day voter registration, limiting dark money in politics, including with new disclosure requirements for outside funding, nonpartisan redistricting, public financing of campaigns, and increased lobbying disclosures. I hope it's not just honorary. The Senate will also begin confirmation hearings for Janet Yellen for Secretary of Treasury, Avril Haines for Director of National Intelligence, Alejandro Mayorkas for Department of Homeland Security Secretary, Anthony Blinken for Secretary of State, and Lloyd Austin for Secretary of Defense. The House returns for a brief pro forma session on Tuesday. Voting will resume on Thursday, the day after the inauguration. In the House, Speaker Nancy Pelosi still hasn't announced when she'll transmit the article of impeachment to the Senate. When she does, that triggers the second Trump impeachment trial. Latest reports say that she'll likely hold back until at least the end of the week, and that proceedings won't begin until next week. But first things first, we have an inauguration planned for Wednesday. The FBI on Monday alerting law enforcement agencies to intelligence reports warning that far-right extremists have talked about going to D.C. for the inauguration and posing as National Guard members. The Washington Post obtained a copy of the document which said lone wolves and QAnon followers, including some who participated in the January 6th siege on the Capitol, have indicated they intend to go to Washington for the inauguration. The report also said people have been observed downloading and distributing maps of sensitive locations in D.C. The report did note that, quote, numerous extremist groups and militias have publicly stated they don't want to see any violence targeting the transition of power. Might be too late for that. Bringing back a tradition that's been missing from the White House for the last 4 years, President-elect Joe Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris took a break from inauguration preparations to participate in service programs marking Martin Luther King Jr. Day on Monday. The Bidens participated in an assembly line filling boxes of fresh fruit and non-perishables with a group that distributes food to people in need called Phil Abundance. Kamala Harris and Doug Emhoff volunteered at a food bank. And a bit more history is being made. Joe Biden has announced Rachel Levine will become Assistant Health Secretary. She will become the first openly transgender federal official to be confirmed by the U.S. Senate. Levine currently serves as Secretary of Health in Pennsylvania and has been leading the state's public health response to the coronavirus pandemic. In a statement, Biden said, quote, she is a historic and deeply qualified choice to help lead our administration's health efforts. And that's just a bit of what's news for now. I'm Nicole Sandler. If you appreciate these reports and the Nicole Sandler Show, I hope you'll consider making a contribution. My work is 100% listener supported, and I can't do it without your help. Find out more at NicoleSandler.com, and please click on that donate button.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. We always begin, whether from around the world, along the banks of the Rogue River, in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 27 degrees Fahrenheit. We are under a freezing fog advisory, and you would think that that would make sense since it's 27 degrees. Expecting a high in the low 50s. Wow, that's somewhat of a swing. Some clouds this morning will give way to generally sunny skies the afternoon with winds light and variable. Clear skies tonight with lows in the upper 20s, low 30s, winds light and variable. Sunshine and clouds mixed tomorrow with a high in the low 50s, winds remaining light and variable. And it looks like we might get some rain to snow on Friday. And then a bit of overnight snow and slush rain during the daytime next week. So we'll look forward to that. Since it was Martin Luther King Day yesterday, we did not get updates in the coronavirus counts on confirmed cases and deceased, which still stand at 6,806 confirmed cases and 82 deceased. We'll get an update on that later today, and we'll have the update for tomorrow. Pollen is rated as none right here in Rogue River proper. The region has a good air quality index at 25 parts per million, and the daytime UV index is low at 2. Barometric pressure is holding steady currently at 30.36 inches. Visibility is down to less than a mile, and relative humidity is at 80%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. London is 51 and cloudy. Paris is 45 and cloudy. Rome is 53 and partly cloudy. Kyiv is 5 degrees and fair. Kabul is 40 degrees with its winter smoke. Hong Kong is 58 and mostly cloudy. Tokyo is 34 and clear with its own freezing fog advisory. Sydney, Australia is 65 and cloudy. San Francisco, California is 54 sunny with lots of wind and a wind advisory. They had gusts almost at 100 miles per hour yesterday. And New York is 40 degrees Fahrenheit and partly cloudy. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property. And these people positively live around the world. Anonymous Reuters staff bring us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Greece's president praised Olympic sailing champion Sofia Bekatorou for dissolving a conspiracy of silence by reporting a historic allegation of sexual assault by a sports official. Bekatorou, who won a gold medal in the 2004 Olympics, told the Greek edition of Marie Claire last month that she had suffered the abuse in 1998 when she was aged 21. Greek President Katerina Sakalaropoulou, who met Bekatorou on yesterday, said her courage offered hope to other women who had suffered similar abuse in their personal and professional lives. I hope her brave revelation will blow like a rushing wind and sweep any hypocrisy, any cover-up attempt away, President Katerina said in a statement. It is time to end the guilt of the victims and the impunity of the perpetrators. Although Bekatorou has referred the case to a prosecutor, Greek law would bar any prosecution after so many years. However, since she made the allegations, other Greek athletes have also come forward, and more recent cases may emerge as a result of those investigations.
Je te donne c'est mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle, c'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Abdi Sheikh of Reuters brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Amineh Mohammed Abdi was just 24 when she first stood for Somali's parliament in 2012, defeating two other candidates to win a seat reserved for women and defying elders from her Hawaii clan, some of whom denounced her as immodest. I was asked, do you want to be a prostitute? How can a woman represent a clan? She told Reuters. I insisted and said a clan is not composed only of men. 4 years later, she won an open seat in Haran, a region north of the capital, Mogadishu. Now 32, and having carved herself a reputation as one of the government's most vocal and visible critics, she will vie for a third term in an overdue election, the only woman in a field of 6 contesting the same seat. She said growing up during a civil war that began in 1992 made her want to enter politics to help rebuild her country. A member of the opposition Union and Peace for Development Party, and now one of 81 women lawmakers in the 275-seat legislative chamber, she later lived with her uncle, himself a parliamentarian, who inspired her further. I was brought up in a country when there was no government, she said. It is necessary for our children to have a government in order to get the basic rights, security, clean water, and quality education. Abdi has translated those wishes into fiery speeches that have resonated beyond Parliament, labeling the government corrupt and incapable of protecting Somalia's 15 million people, accusations that it denied. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day. But you do know Netroots Radio will broadcast on, and we'll meet up tomorrow for Smothered Benedict Wednesdays, Inauguration Day. Yes, indeed. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we'll meet up here tomorrow, right here, in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair. T'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver.